Hello folks, welcome back to Gelvin Valley. I don't know how many episodes we were into this, but more than enough. Well, let me set my timer before we get started here. Once again, my little cow timer from good friend Eustace Farmer. It's set on 30 minutes, so I know where to go. Here's my little ticking bomb. Farming Simulator 15, map by Wild Wez. I know I've said it many times, but I never know who comes to this and may not know what this is. I gotta say, if I just pause a moment, this hill keeps going down, of course. There's another, let me just look at the map. Another dry wash. We're sitting over here. Well, it's maybe kind of hard to tell. There's a deep area here. You don't see the blue of the where the trail would or the water would go if it rained. You know, this one we put in up here was, I think it was up here. Was it along field number 18? Yeah, that's the one we put in. But I mean, there's a pretty steep ravine over here, as we can see. Probably would be water in it in the real life. There's, you can see down over here, there's a cut that probably would have water running down it. But I don't know that I have the energy to put that in there. But I just kind of notice it as I take in more of this beautiful map. It's only certain areas we work with as a general rule on here, kind of in the fields, but there's a lot of areas that are there for ambiance that really we never go to, that are just kind of there. And we'd have to go kind of exploring, if you will, to find all those areas. So really there probably isn't any point in setting up a stream kind of in the bottom of that. Maybe there we could. Point is, as a player, just isn't down there as a general rule, so if it isn't something we would see, then probably no sense trying to expend modding effort to create it. Probably could say that about a lot of things. But I notice we are running low on a fuel, so I'm going to be able to get through this field. We just we refilled with seed not that long ago, but I think I'm going to need to fill up with fuel again before too long. And it's just steeper than all get out of here. Part of the reason why I love it. It's kind of, anytime you rise over the map, it distorts that. Actually, you don't really see it there. It's where you get down kind of on the same level the tractor just gets steep over here. Anyway, that's another one down. Head on to the next one, which is going to be field 42. Trying to get through them all. I know in a previous episode I've asked forwarded time to get to another day so I didn't have to just work in the dark. Take our little planter and get through these narrow gates. Putting in a ton of barley. Actually, speaking of dry wash, here's one right here. Kind of going up into this meadow and then heading down the other way. You just know the water would run through there with a good hard rain. But it isn't really marked on this particular map. He's marked some of them in blue. Not this one here. So that's maybe one I could put in if the player would have the possibility of seeing it. But it also takes a lot of work. So I gotta be in the mood before I expend at or see what can you see down here? Yeah, see, there's another steep ravine. That's just kind of the way geography works. Where there's a ravine, you're gonna probably find water. Yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I like to do something on this edge over here. It just, yeah, looks a little funny. Maybe if you're in game, yeah, if you're in cab, you don't notice it as much. When you're out of cab, which is how I typically play, it doesn't quite look right. But I haven't done anything to it heretofore. I've kind of just talked about it, so maybe I'll never get to it. I don't know. But usually when we get in a little ways, I think this was maybe a hayfield up here. I'm not sure if that's just what the map author intended. Maybe I need to put in more trees along the edge. Once you get into the edge, it works a little better in terms of suspending reality. Oh, now I gotta try to pull this hill. And it's a doozy, especially when I got an underpowered tractor. It's going to take a little bit because it's steep. Steeper don't get out. I wonder what the gradient is. I don't even know if in real life you would dare to pull a hill with a little tractor like this. Maybe it would. I'm just saying it's steep. I can even hear the wind blow. And I'm curious, has anybody noticed, I still have a mod installed, a quick one that I brought over from Farm Sim 17 that eliminates fog. Let me just step out to show the difference. You see the difference? How you see distance fog now, kind of in the distant hills. It's not quite as clear, which I believe is somewhat to mimic real life. But I know I've always just appreciated having a little clarity. I mean, it is a game after all. I guess if a person wants fog, you can have it for a little while. And there are times in game where there can be a lot of fog, and it's hard to move around and see where you're going. Right now isn't one of those times because I just turned it on and you still have pretty decent visibility. But off in the distance you can tell there's fog. So let me just step out real quick and you can kind of see it there. We turned it off. Now it's back off, so there's a lot. It's more colorful. So it's kind of like after a heavy rain, where the atmosphere just clears and you can see longer distances. I know we always notice it at home. We live in a valley surrounded by mountains, and to the north there's more mountains, volcanoes, and you can always tell kind of how clear the air is by how far you're able to see into the distance. And to the north of us, probably a 2.5 hour drive, maybe it's 3 hours. Mount St. Helens, volcano up there. We don't often see it, just kind of in normal times, if you will. But on crystal clear mornings, you can easily see the mountain from here. Of course, Mount Hood we're next to. But further north of Mount St. Helens is another volcano, Mount Rainier. This is up in Washington State. And sometimes you can even see it if it's really clear. That's a very tall mountain up there. So I just like having it in game here clear, where you can see off in the distance a little easier, and maybe it isn't quite as realistic. It's kind of pretending that everything is, there's no pollution, no distance fog, or whatever you would call it, but I just kind of like the ambiance a little better, to be honest. So I took out the fog. There is none. And I know there's always been those mods, that promise to remove the fog with various techniques, and I'd be curious, that's something you guys use, or do you like having the fog? All the way to the opposite. I remember back in Farm Sim 11, there was a mod that specifically added fog. I don't know if they had it in the base game. So this mod added fog so that you'd have a foggy morning. And so every every morning had fog on it. Eventually you get tired of it and take it out. But now it seems like there's more mods that take out the fog versus leaving it in. Or at least that's kind of my preference. Come on, climb the hill. Hear the wind blow. Well, as always, I try to think of what to talk about in these videos. Not that any of it is marginally entertaining in the slightest, but to have something to exercise my voice. The idea of being low on fuel reminds me of a stupid mistake I made on the farm. One of many back in the day when I worked there, and I know I'm not the only person that's made mistakes or whatever on the farm. Farm sure seems to be a place where a guy can make a whole lot of them, though. I don't know why that is, but I remember it was harvest season. It was on Lone Oak, and we were out in the field so often. I mean, the combines would be left in the field, usually taken to a place where nobody could just see them from the road. There's always a potential for vandalism and people coming and doing things to your machinery if they could see them. So I wouldn't say we went overboard in trying to hide them, but we didn't just go overboard to make them visible either. They're a sizable investment in those machines, so keeping them protected is somewhat of a priority. But anyway, I mean, kind of the morning ritual, greasing up the machine and fueling them up. And when you're the low guy in the totem pole, well, you're the one that gets to fuel. And this was kind of old school. I think most of us know, as when we go into the service station, there is automatic equipment, that turns the flow of the fuel off once it detects, that the unit that the fuel is flowing into is full. Well, some of the old equipment and whatnot that we used on the farm didn't have that ability, so you had to keep an eye on it. Of course, at the same time, as we were servicing the combines and running around them with a grease gun or blowing out air filters, whatever we're doing, we would kind of get the fuel going. We'd put something under the nozzle to get it to hold it open so that the fuel would flow, and then we'd go about doing other stuff and try to keep an eye on it so you didn't overfill. Well, there was so many times it would get overfilled, and you'd find fuel just glug, glug, glug coming out the back, just going onto the ground and making a mess. And yeah, it's kind of a waste and not very good for the environment, if you will. But one morning when we were doing this, took the cap off the combine tank, and I put it on the hood of the pickup. You know, the pickup had the tank in it of fuel. It's pretty common in this area, at least during that time era, where the tanks would be in the back on the bed of the pickup, several hundred gallons of fuel, whatever it was, and it would have a hose to take it to the combine and flip a switch, turn on the pump, whatever. And so I took the cap, I put it on the hood of the pickup, which would have been okay if I had remembered that I stuck it there, but unfortunately I didn't. And in this case, I don't think I overflowed the fuel, but I forgot about the doggone cap, you know, that I set on the hood of the pickup. So all three combines we had at the time were sitting in a row. So when I was unfueling one, I hopped in the pickup. I I think I probably went too fast backing up to move it around to take it to the next combine to fuel it up. Well, in the process, the cap that was sitting on the hood went flying off somewhere into the loose straw, and we never were able to find it. And so what it meant is, and nor did we have a spare. I think eventually they bought a new cap, but they didn't want to just leave the combine off for the entire day. So I think a rag was put over the opening, and we combined with it. And unfortunately, there was untold amounts of straw, dust, and other corruption that got into the fuel tank as a result of this. You know, we did put like I say, a rag kind of in it to kind of close it off as best we could, but there was a lot of junk that somehow managed to get in there. And they fought it, and this was entirely my fault. They fought it for years. There would be times when the combine would get straw or some other corruption in the lines, and it would literally die in the middle of the field. And so the operator would have to get out, clean out the sediment bulb under the fuel tank, and crank her back up to keep on going, and it just took a long, long time. And of course, by that time, we had a replacement for the cap, but the damage, you know, was already done, and just, you know, one of those stupid things. As I look at my fuel tank on this tractor, 22 liters, and at some point, maybe I'll be able to finish this field before I need to refuel. I'll need to make sure I know where I put the cap. Sneak around this here tree. Come on, Grandma. Get on up this just incredibly steep. The other thing that was on my mind for some reason is driving foibles. You know, I think there was a time in here I talked about car wrecks and those kinds of things. I've been in a wreck before, just one, and that's plenty. Never hope to have to be in one of those again. But I was just thinking of driving foibles. Learning to drive is something all of us have had to do at one time or other. I mean, I have a son right now who's, I think here in the States, depending on what state you live in, most places, I think, when you turn 15, you can go get a provisional driver's permit and start learning to drive, and you usually have to go to driver's ed. Well, I don't know if everybody has to. I know our kids have. And it's just a wonder sometimes that more people aren't hurt or even killed as they learn to drive. And I say that for me too. I mean, shoot, I'm an average driver like anyone else, and when a person tallies up the close calls you have in life or whatever, it's, yeah. See, you can thank the good Lord that you weren't taken ahead of your time. But I had a memory come back of when I was first learning to drive. Let me see if I get a GPS setup on this. Probably could do it on the long leg, maybe. Alright. Crank this up, I think. It's still kind of the wrong angle. Yeah. Still won't totally get it all. Not sure. There's multi-angle terrain. There we go. I think that'll get it. Use a GPS here to help keep me straight. Although I could just, well, keep going round and round. Just amazing odds some of these guys have made. But I learned to drive basically on the farm. Or, I mean, even before, you know, we always had a big yard, so lots of grass to mow. Did a ton of that as a kid. I don't know, does that count in learning how to drive? I mean, I think so. I mean, you gotta learn the basic handling of a machine and see what it's like to hold the steering wheel in your hand and that kind of thing. So that probably was my earliest experience. But then on the farm, you know, I was doing things there long before it was really legal to even have a license. You know, I think of 8th grade, starting to drive farm machinery of some sort or other, and being on the road, and then all the way through high school. So I mean, for really a couple of years before ever getting the official license, if you will, to do it, or even the permit. So a lot of that was in tractors, or like a windrower, self-propelled windrower, some of those kinds of things, or a grain truck, just an old truck, single axle, hauling, you know, things from the field to the main farm. And fortunately, in most of that, I didn't screw up things too badly. Now, there were screw-ups, don't get me wrong, but not too badly. So it was doubly embarrassing to me and when I actually got my permit and could drive the official family vehicle. We had this, I think it was a Dodge van back in the day. This would have been, I'm trying to think the time era, right at the tail end of the 1980s. Yeah, I'm kind of an old guy now. So you got to think of what time era the vehicles or whatever that we were running. But I had no trouble with the tractors or the grain truck. But I think what it is it just takes a little bit of time to learn how something else handles. You know, when you're used to a heavy machine and where you can accelerate at a certain rate because it's so heavy, you have to do certain things, and then you get in a smaller vehicle and it handles totally different from, you know, the big old truck or whatever. So it just takes getting used to. I still remember the family van, the first time my mom turned it over to me to drive, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I got all this, you know, typical cockiness, you know, when you're young. And I get in there and promptly spew gravel everywhere because I punched it too hard and the wheel was just throwing gravel all over the road as I tried to get onto the road. And of course that made my mom excited. I thought I was going to drive it straight off the road. Fortunately didn't. Figured that out. But probably the worst one was with my dad. And, you know, who likes to who likes to be embarrassed in front of your old man? So he had an old Ford pickup. I say old, I don't know how old it was at that point. Stick shift, standard transmission. You don't see as much of that anymore, but it was no problem for me. I was already well familiar with stick shift, being on the farm and standard transmission and the trucks and even the tractors. I mean, just shifting and all that. That part wasn't any big deal. But again, that probably bred some overconfidence because I figured, well, I got this. This is just a pickup. I know how to drive this. Well, he had it sitting. There was kind of a gravel lot behind our house, and I'm trying to think exactly where it was. We had a shop building up there. We had a fence kind of to the west and south of where his truck was sitting. And in retrospect, he probably shouldn't have given me the wheel where he did. I mean, the truck was basically pointing right at his fence, where we had several cattle kept in. And that's where the problem happened. Get in, turn the key over, and I knew, I mean, I don't know if it's just jitters, what it is. I knew how to run a standard transmission. It wasn't that. I just had my foot on the wrong stinking pedal. And so I was pushing what I thought was the brake, and I think it was just the clutch. So pushing on the clutch, it was kind of on a little bit of an incline. And then I couldn't slow it down. I think I must have had it in gear, maybe. And it took me right down into the stupid fence. And I just bulldozed the thing over. And we didn't have a very highfalutin fence. I mean, Dad always set the anchor post with railroad ties. But in between them, it was just, in those days, we didn't have a woven wire fence on it. It was just a double strand of barbed wire with electric shock on it. So I think I hit one of those stakes, bent it over. These were the old, I remember pounding them in with a sledgehammer, steel stakes, pretty spindly, no match for the pickup. It just hit it and ran it over. I think eventually my foot finally found the right pedal, got on the brake, but not before bending the fence over, if you will. And I don't remember Dad ever heckling me about it later. I think he just laughed it off. As typical, like I say, probably overconfidence, whatever it is. There's nothing like screwing up to try to inject an ounce of humility. Or that's what it should do anyways. But I'd be curious if anybody wants to comment, what stupid things, if you're willing to share, have you done when you were learning to drive, if you can remember that far back. And maybe if there's some younger folks listening to this, maybe you're perfect at it, but seems to me most of us make mistakes being human. I'd be curious where you've screwed up learning how to drive. And it's one thing in back of the house for this to happen and hit a fence or whatever. I mean, nobody was hurt. Not even the pickup was damaged. I mean, I think the wires hit it just right. I don't think they scratched. It didn't even scratch any paint, or very minor if it did. So the only thing wounded, I think, was my pride, to have that happen in front of my dad. But oh well. Wasn't the worst thing I've ever been through. But when you think of it, I mean, I grew up in the country, so I kind of had an opportunity on a farm to practice a little bit, and we had space at home for this kind of thing to have happen. I don't know what others do if they grow up in town, and the first time you take the wheel and you're parked right next to your neighbor's car, or your neighbor's mailbox, or your neighbor's whatever, well, you probably got to be a bit more on the ball than some of us would have had to, just having more space out in the country. But I like telling my kids that I knew how to drive a tractor before I ever knew how to drive a car or anything like that. Sounds kind of funny to say that, but it's true. It's probably true of a lot of kids that grow up on the farm, and even as I say that, I can't claim to have grown up on a farm either. I was just blessed to have family members who had farms or were engaged in farming activity and needed help and were daft enough to hire me to come do the helping. Let's just say there was a steep learning curve. Oh my goodness. 30 minutes just kind of flies by. We're not even done with Field 42. Here's another area where I wish we could do something a little bit different as I just plant right through a patch of weeds. It has to do with the game mechanics, but those weeds aren't part of the foliage system. The crops, we're planting barley at the moment. That is part of the foliage system. I think if we had the soil mod installed, it has weeds in it, so that also is a type of foliage or programmed in there. But these others, they're basically a type of decoration that behaves like foliage, but it's untouched, unfazed by the system itself. And I've always heard that in the soil mod there was something that you could use to kill everything, maybe even including that other foliage, but I'm not sure that it'll take it out. I don't have the soil mod installed in here at the moment, although I know the app is set up for it. But yeah, maybe I'll give that a try at some point. But I'm going to get turned around here, and I think that's going to be another episode in the can. Another marginal quality rambling from an old man. So, thank you so much for stopping by to spend a little time with me. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.